welcome to Maker's Spring Information Session. My name is Ahromi, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the ACTs and the foundation class today. So spring is a very important turning point for the ACT students because of the enhanced session rolling out and whatnot. And so by this time, many of you guys have already taken the test, perhaps at least once, maybe twice, and parents are left with the important questions. Why isn't my son or daughter's score moving? Or is our child on the right track? And what should actually be different about prepping in the spring? Because they're going to graduate soon and we really need a good score. So today's session is actually designed to give parents clarity. We'll talk about what the ACT doesn't clearly advertise. It's a little bit hidden, especially what has changed with the enhanced ACT and why more practice time does not automatically lead to higher scores. And most importantly, I'll explain the difference between students whose scores are not improving very much in the spring and those who continue to improve and why they are doing so. And so how a structured strategy-based approach makes that difference. So by the end of the day, you should get a much clearer view on how to move forwards with the ACT and your training for beyond. So regarding the enhanced test, they gave out some information that probably everybody knows at this point because it's been out for a while. And so the most obvious changes on the enhanced platform is there's a lot more time that is given. So for example, for English, they reduced the time actually, but the question numbers have been reduced as well. For reading, however, that is where the students are going to feel the biggest changes. There is 5 extra minutes, which actually doesn't seem like a lot, but actually when you take the exam, 5 minutes is a godsend. And so this is something that everybody knows already. It's been rehashed again and again, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse over here. Let's move on to what we're actually looking for. And so if a 학원 is worth their salt, they're going to go beyond just talking about the obvious. And the ACT has all of the information on the site regarding the changes that we saw before, right? This is something that you can look up. But our job as the Makers teachers is to look for things that the ACT does not clearly advertise. So how can we take the student from the level that they are at now to beyond that? What can we do even more? How can we dissect the test so that we're looking for the things that the student really needs to work on? And so actually from year to year, there haven't been any significant changes between the average composite scores. And this is actually what students were and parents were on the lookout for when the enhanced ACT rolled out. They thought, oh, okay, well, like the SAT, when they changed to the digital format, the scores went up a little bit when it first rolled out. And so students in the States were kind of thinking the same thing. And actually, when they put together all of the composite scores for that year, it turned out to be not that significantly different from the previous year, 2024. So what that means for us is because the enhanced ACT scores remain comparable to the old version, that means that just because your student has more time, like a whole extra 5 minutes on the reading section, does not necessarily mean that they are guaranteed a higher score. So what does that translate to? Well, it translates to you're not going to have an easy time getting a perfect score. There's no shortcut around this. You still have to work hard and you still have to take classes. You still have to train. So how can we get that higher score with the enhanced ACT? How can we use it to our advantage? We need to adapt the strategy. So what we've been figuring out is this is the proposed future state. If you look to the right side of the screen, under the English section, there are 50 items, 50 questions, but there's something a little bit weird over here. In the parentheses, you see 10 FT. What does FT mean? On the SATs, you're probably very familiar with something called experimental questions. So these are questions that are kind of hidden throughout the exam, but they are not graded. So even if you get it wrong, it's totally fine. It doesn't go towards your score, doesn't affect it. Okay, so then you might think, all right, well, if I get it wrong and it doesn't affect my score, that's fine, right? That works to my favor. But there's 10 of them over here. So what is the implication of that? 50 minus 10, 40. Uh-oh. That means if you get one wrong, that counts for a lot more. So then students started panicking. They were like, oh no, should I not take the enhanced version then because of these 10 FT items? We'll talk a little bit about that in a few seconds. But first, how were we able to find this little hidden thing? Well, ACT has this PDF that they kind of hid inside their website. It's about 100 pages or so long. So I went through all of that. And you don't have to. And in this particular page, there was this sentence that said, as is typical, the embedded field test units will not be the first or last unit of the section. What does that mean for us? That means that when you are taking the exam, on the reading section, there are discrete passages, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first or last unit in the section are always scored. They're not going to be the experimental questions. And so the ones in the middle, maybe the third one or the second one, that one will be the field test unit question. And even if you get questions wrong on that, it will not go towards your score. And so, of course, my students like to roll their brains. And then one of my students was asking me, oh, so teacher, does that mean that I only have to solve the first and last passage and I could just skip the entire passage in the middle? No, that's not what that means. You still have strategies around that. But, if worse comes to worst case scenario, if you run out of time, you typically want to leave the passages in the middle to do last, just in case, So that's one of the strategies that we like to teach our students. So the old ACT strategies, unfortunately, don't work anymore. A lot of the basic reading and writing skills, they do carry over. I mean, that's, the basic, similarly to the SATs. But because of the changes in the number of questions and the field test questions, the scoring is going to seem a little bit different. So on the old version, the legacy version, as we see over here, if you got 2 questions wrong on a section, you could still get a perfect score. If you were, if this test was a little bit lenient that day, you could still get a 36. However, on the new version, if you get 2 wrong, because there's not a lot of questions and because not many of them are graded, it drops, unfortunately. It drops to a 34. So every single question matters. You have to focus on every single one. And therefore, the students need to shift their strategy from speed to accuracy. Now, the ACT was always about speed, and it still kind of is, but before it was mainly about speed. They were really I would see students flipping their pages and wow, they were sweating, trying to read everything in time. But now that is not really the case anymore because you do have a little bit of time. And so what matters now is accuracy. Now, how are we going to build up accuracy? One of the things that we could do is focus on vocab a lot more because before you could really get away with not knowing a couple words here and there. You could use the context, you could guess a little bit, and if you got one wrong, fine, whatever. But on this one, if you don't know one particular word, oof, that could drop your score from a 36 that you need to a 35. So accuracy really matters. So the vocab quizzes that we give our students, they are fashioned in a way where they could really retain the information. So it's not just raw memorization of every single vocab word, like 50, 100 a day. No, we actually go back and we test the students about what they learned on the first day and the second day a couple weeks later so that they can actually retain the information that they need for the test that is going to come up maybe like a week later or several weeks later or several months later in the future. So as long as students have coach structure, they're going to be rewarded with a 36 so that they can get into Harvard or Yonsei or wherever they want to go. Now, what we do at Makers is we try to go beyond just lecture. If you go to these huge 학원s that are like factories, they just sit down like 50 students in one class and they just lecture at them, not with them. And so the students are just there for, I don't know, 6, 7 hours sitting at their desk and they're trying to learn this information, but it's not really any different from just taking 인강 at home, right? It's just how much could you learn from just listening and not really interacting with the teacher? Not a lot. So what we try to do is really try to interact with the student and figure out what they need. So the strategies are changed according to the type of test takers the student is. And from the perspective of a teacher, there's a lot of different types of test takers, and there's no particular type that is better than another. We're all different. So there's several reading strategies, for example, that a student can use that matches their particular type of test taking style. So you could either read the entire passage at once and then go through the questions after that, or you could skip around. It really depends. So I try to tell the students, okay, this strategy works for you, but you over there, you got to use something else. So the optimal one depends on the level of the student and also at the very beginning, of course, nobody's not going to know what kind of test taker they are. So this is why they need to come to class and take several, at least several mock exams so that they can figure out, oh, maybe this one works for me. Or perhaps, maybe this one is not really the strategy that I should take. Maybe I should approach the questions first and then go to the passage later. And so I'm going to be helping them by figuring out the strategy that works. The other thing that we figure out is the breakdown of time structure per passage or question. So every type of question, well, not every question is similar to the other one. So in other words, there might be a vocab question that takes maybe like 3 to 5 seconds. And then for a main idea question, that could perhaps take a minute and a half. So the breakdown is what the students need as well. We also identify error type patterns. There are certain types of students who make careless errors. They really know all of the reading information, they know all of the grammar rules, their vocabulary is perfect, and yet they still make 1 or 2 errors per test. Why? Maybe they weren't focusing that day. Maybe they really didn't know that vocabulary word. That is also something that we try to figure out. And lastly, there is student-teacher interaction. This is kind of what I'm really proud about. I really love talking to my students. And if there is a day where I don't talk to any of my students or they don't talk back to me, that's a really sad day for me. That's when I feel like I failed as a teacher. So this is very important. Why? Well, not because, I'm an E or I really like to talk with people. No, it's important for understanding and improving their logic on problem solving. So especially when I ask them, hey, Minji, how did you solve question number 3? Can you explain to me how you got B? There's certain types of students who can exactly walk me through every single thing that they did. And they're like, oh, well, I thought this part of the passage meant this. And so I eliminated A, B, and C, and I got D. However, there are other types of students who say, I didn't really understand the passage, so I kind of was looking at the last sentence over here, and I saw this word, and it matched up to that word in the answer choice, so that's why I chose that. Well, that tells me exactly what their weakness is and what kind of lecture or what kind of information they need in order to get the next type of question correct. And so because there is interaction like this is how we are able to fashion our lectures to be more devoted to the student. So a little bit about the ACT frequently asked questions. How does the scoring work? The composite score is combined of English, reading, and math. Now, the enhanced one, the science is optional. And so if you decide to take the science, it goes toward your STEM score where they average the math and the science together. There is also a writing section that is optional. And so they take English reading and writing, and that goes towards an ELA score. So these are completely optional. Should we take the science? Should we take the writing? Well, it kind of depends on what you want to major in the universities. And also, like, if you're particularly good at science, why not? And so it just tells the students you have this extra skill set. For the writing section, it's a little bit difficult. So we would actually talk about the student with the writing section before they decide to take it. Can I superscore across old and new tests? This was actually a question that came up from one of my previous students. Yes, in most cases. For actually both of the questions that you see on screen, should I take it until I get my optimal score? It depends on the university that you want to apply to in the future. So you should check the policy, go through their website, call them, contact them, and ask if this is possible. So, for example, Harvard unfortunately accepts either the old score or the new score, not both. You can't combine it, unfortunately. But for the most universities, they do allow crossing over between the old and new test. And then important, should I take it until I get my optimal score? Can I take it 10 times, 20 times? Well, yeah, sure, they don't limit you, but it also depends on the college. So, for example, Georgetown requires you to send every single test score. So they'll see the test score from like 5 years ago, or you got like a 10. That's not really great, right? So it really depends on the college. Most importantly, should I take the ACT or SAT? This is probably where a lot of parents are concerned, and a lot of students are concerned too, because if they want to study for one, they have to just focus on that one. And they can't really mix the two together because the strategies differ. Now, the first thing that I want to say over here is not one test is better than the other. Not one test is prioritized over the other when the colleges see the scores. Okay, so they're exactly the same, but just the style of the test differs. So the final thing that I want to leave you with here for this question is, depending on the type of test taker your student is, you can choose the exam. Now, the SAT you would choose if your reading level is slightly better. Because why? The reading questions are more complex. They twist it and they turn it. You need to figure out the hacks here and there. So it's trickier. And it requires a lot of inference and implied understanding. So the reading is going to really like catch your ankle over here for the SAT. And for the ACT, if your reading skills are not top notch, I would maybe, go towards the ACT. The reading is definitely a lot easier. Well, okay, let me just go back a little bit. It's not easier in that the words are easier or the passages are easier. No, the questions are more straightforward. So as long as you can retain the information of what you just read and you understand it somewhat, the questions are just going to be very straightforward. Makers, why is Makers better? Why is Makers the place to come to? It's bespoke. You have seen the word bespoke in advertisements, usually for refrigerators or, those, is it LG or Samsung that makes them? I don't know. But bespoke means that we tailor it, we custom make it for whatever you need. These lessons, they're tailored to the student's need. Every single student is different. They need a unique type of lesson, and we try to provide it for them. It is not like the factories. And what we do is we repeat concepts until you can repeat it, until you understand it and solve the questions in your sleep again and again. We offer the paper-based and the computer-based exams, the legacy and the new, and we're going to mix it together. And so by changing up the test conditions, the students are ready and flexible for anything. Worst case scenario, they can get a 36. So for the advanced classes, there is, of course, there are students that don't really need a lot more instructions. So for those students, we provide in-depth reading analysis. So only the things that they particularly need. So the classes at Makers, we really look at the student and not really anything else. The student is what matters to us. The next part that I'm going to talk about are foundation classes. Foundation classes are necessary for students who have basic reading and writing skills, but need to elevate them a little bit more, improve them a little bit more, so that they are ready to take the more difficult exams like the SAT or ACT. So these are preparation classes, to put it simply. What we go over for writing classes is all grammar rules. We go over all of the grammar rules starting from the very beginning. Subject, verb, object. What part of speech is the word am? What part of speech is the word you? And so parents might be thinking, is this really necessary? My student is a senior. I don't think they need this. Moms, dads, please, after the session, go to your student and ask them, hey, Joshua, hey, Minji, do you know what a verb is? Can you tell me what a preposition is? How do you make a sentence in English? Listen to their answers. You're going to be very surprised. So yes, actually, we do need to start from the very beginning for a lot of students. Now we go from the beginning all the way up to intermediate/lower advanced level. And these grammar rules, they are universal. They could be used for every single exam and the TOEFL and whatever writing sessions that they need to take in the future, even in university. It's also proven to be the fastest way to improve the scores. I am fully behind this point over here. It is actually the fastest way because reading is a little bit difficult to improve upon, but writing is just rules. If you memorize the rules, it's just black and white. So this is very, very necessary. And the reason why it's important is because the skills impact the reading skills as well. You need to take these two classes together. We cannot separate it. Why? Because one depends on the other. In foundation class, we also go at a slower pace and we also do daily drills to make sure that these students understand the concepts 100% before we move on to the next part. Another question that parents have is, well, didn't the students learn or don't they learn the grammar in regular SAT or ACT classes? Why do I need to enroll my student in a foundation class? Why is it necessary? Don't they go over this in the other classes as well? Yeah, we do, but not often do we go over the basic grammar questions. And we don't often start from the very beginning. We maybe like to mix the grammar rules, and maybe we might start from participles, like maybe the middle of the book, and then jump back to another grammar rule. It might get a little bit confusing if you don't have the basic skills. So if you look at this example SAT writing question from the side, this entire thing is not a paragraph. It's actually one entire sentence. So that kind of gives you an idea about how well the student needs to know the structure of the sentences. They need to know exactly the syntax of how a sentence is formed, because it's not just subject, verb, object. No, it's not just tense or one rule that is being tested at a time. Often there are many rules that come together where the students have to go through them and dissect it and figure out what exactly is wrong. So for example, what we have over here is we have a main clause with modifiers in the front and in the back, and the rules over here are mixed up between present participle and verbals and verbs. It's very confusing. And of course, if you think it's confusing, how confusing will it be for the students? Very much. So because it could get complicated like that, I try to simplify as much as possible in foundation. So when I think back on some of the best teachers from my high school days or middle school days, the things that I still remember from maybe my science classes or math classes or English classes are things that my teachers told me through tips and tricks. And so, for example, mnemonics. Mnemonics are things like this, fanboys, where you take words together and then simplify it into one single word so that the students can remember. Fanboy stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And so I always repeat it every single day. And I ask them, hi, Chow, what does fanboy stand for? And he says, for and, nor, but, or yet, so yay, very good. And so every single time after we do that, after a year or 2 years, he's still going to remember. Also, I like to maybe incorporate math into grammar, which is totally possible. So I do something like this. And is a conjunction that combines a word and a word, or a phrase and a phrase, or a clause and a clause. Whatever you combine has to be the same. So for example, you can add 2 plus 2 together, but not 2 plus blue. So this is the kind of instruction that I give to the students. And of course, that's really easy to memorize, right? It's just math. So when you come to makers, we focus mainly on the students, and we are really, really committed to giving them the highest score possible. Now, in the next section, Jane teacher is going to go over the other type of foundation class, so stick around for that, please. Thank you very much.